Hi everybody, we're going to have a second little video on the subject of Bible study. So this is the Bible study video number 2, and we talked previously about Bible reading. I mean, this month the students of Home Bible College are reading through Philippians. What we'd like you to do each day is to just read the whole book. It shouldn't take you more than 10 minutes, quarter of an hour maximum, depending on how fast you read. Just want you to just read it every day of the month. So for example, for this month you might read it 30 times. But each day you're reading it and you're refreshing it and you're getting it into your head. Read it out loud. That's a little tip. Read it out loud. Read it maybe into a tape recorder or into some sort of recording device, and you might even then like to listen to yourself, reading it back to yourself at a later date. So that's reading. Now we're going to get into the subject of study. Now study is quite a different matter to reading, because study by its very nature is slower and it's a little bit less fluid. It's a little bit disjointed, but that's okay. Now there are at least 2 different types of Bible study. There's what I call synthetic study and natural study. Now synthetic study is when we're studying the Bible in a way in which the Bible is not actually presented. The Bible is presented in books, but it's possible to study the Bible in a way that's synthetic, and I'll explain in a moment what that is. And then of course there's another way of studying, which is what I call natural study. Now natural study is my preferred method. I prefer to study the Bible naturally. I prefer to study it in the form in which God has given it. See the point? Now let's look at synthetic study. Synthetic study is something that's good, and a lot of people like to do it that way. So let's look at the different ways in which people can study synthetically. The first one is to study by topic. Now, if you get hold of a good concordance like Cruden's concordance, or even Nave's Topical study book, then you can then look at topics. You might look at baptism, or you might look at Christ, or you might look at salvation. Whatever the subject is that you want to look at, you'll go and you'll either in the concordance or through a topical dictionary, you'll look at the subject and you will look through all of the references in all of the Bible about that particular topic. Now that actually is a fascinating way of studying the Bible. I've studied in that way many times in my life, and what you will eventually find that you'll have, if you keep your notes, is you'll eventually have a tremendous amount of notes, but they will be recorded according to this subject, according to the topic that you're looking at. And you might, for example, have a program on your computer in which you would, when you're looking at a topic, you might have an alphabetical arrangement. So for example, in the future, if you want to go and have a look at what you studied when you looked at, say, baptism, then you can go back to the B and you'll find baptism there, and you'll find all your little notes in there. Now this is actually a really good way of studying. I highly recommend it. Now there's another method of studying called word study. So this is at the other end of the spectrum. Instead of studying a particular subject, what you're doing is you're taking a particular word, like you might take the word baptism. Okay, and you will go into the word study books. You might look at your Strong's concordance. You might look at all the different ways in which it's possible to study biblical words. Now the first thing we have to remember is that the biblical words were not English or any other language, or French or German. The biblical words were always in Greek. Okay, unless of course you're in the Old Testament or certain parts of the New Testament which were in Hebrew. So this is this is what I call microscopic study. This is where you take one little thing, a word, and you analyze it and you study it and you see how that word is used throughout the Bible. So topical study then takes a whole subject and looks at the whole Bible from that subject, and word study looks at a tiny little word in the Bible. Both of these studies are absolutely fascinating. So that's another little book that you might like to make for yourself, which is basically your own little dictionary, and you might have it arranged alphabetically, but the important thing is that you're looking at individual words. Now there's another way of studying, and that is what I call sentence study, okay, or phrase study. You might look at the subject of the love of God, and that's a particular phrase. You might find that expression is used quite a number of times in the Bible, and you might collect all the different places where that phrase is used. At the moment I'm writing a little dictionary for myself called the Expository Dictionary of New Testament Phrases. See, the Bible is not given to us just in words. The Bible is given to us in phrases. See? So these are all different synthetic ways of studying the Bible. They're absolutely fascinating. I absolutely highly recommend it. Okay? But the study method that I prefer most is what I call natural study. And natural study is where we take the Bible in the form that God has given it. Now, God has not given us the Bible in a topical format. There's no book of the Bible that tells us everything we need to know about prayer. There's no Bible book that tells us about baptism. There's no Bible book that tells us about Jesus. All of these topics are evenly spread out throughout the whole Bible. And the Bible is not just given to you as a collection of words. It's not even just given to you as a collection of sentences. The Bible is given to you in books, in large blocks of writing. But this writing comes in lots of different formats. It might come in prose. It might come in poetry. It might come in the form of proverb. It might come to you in the form of a story, a narrative. It might come to you in the form of a discussion. It might come to you in the form of apocalyptic vision. Or it might come to you in the form of a letter. And each of these ways of studying need to be borne in mind. But the most important thing is that we look at the Bible in its natural form. So the first thing we need to be saying is, what does the Bible teach as a whole? Now we need to get what I call the overall big picture. What does the Bible as a whole teach? That's the question. And that's the question I think that should occupy the Christian mind first. What does the Bible teach as a whole? So for example, we might look at 3 questions, or 2 questions and then another little task. First of all, how do all the books of the Bible fit together? I mean, is there a link between Revelation and Joshua? There is. Is there a link between Esther and Ruth? Yeah, there is. So the question really is, how do the books of the Bible fit together? And what are the groupings of the Bible books? Now you might find it interesting to know that the Hebrew Old Testament is not in the same arrangement that we have in our English Bible. Now that's something for you to look into, because you'll discover that some of the books that you thought were about history are actually poetry. You'll discover that some of the books that you thought were history are actually songs to be sung. You know, the Bible is a fascinating book, and the ancient Hebrews looked at the Bible differently than the way in which we Christians look at them. So for example, the book of Ruth was sung at harvest. The book of Esther was sung at the Feast of Purim. So why? Why was it sung? Well, that's for you to find out. And you'll discover that the books that you thought were prophecy are prophecy. Or maybe they are prophecy, but they're in verse or they're in meter. See? So this is absolutely fascinating. The Old Testament in particular, we need to really rethink how we think about it because of how the books were laid out and grouped together in the Old Testament times. And then what I suggest you do is for each of the books of the Bible that you just go through them and you look at each book and you give each book a little brief title, something that will enable you to be able to remember what the overall subject of the book is about. Now that's a fascinating thing. In fact, it's possible when you're driving along, you've got a moment or two to spare and your mind is free to say to yourself, Genesis, what's that about? Just a little sentence. Exodus, what's that about? At the end, just a little sentence. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And it's possible to go through all of the books of the Bible and review them in your mind because you've given a title to each one. And what this will enable you to do, it will enable you to survey the whole Bible using your little titles that you've given to each book. And you can go through the Bible mentally. As you're just driving along, you can go through the Bible mentally and think about the message or the main point of each of the books of the Bible. And that really is an interesting and fascinating task in its own way. The next thing we need to think about with the books of the Bible is this. Is what are the features of each book? What are the features of each book? For example, you might want to record some of the basic details. How many chapters has it got? Who's the book written to? What's the context of the book? Now, for those of you that can understand these things, you need to really think about what is the dispensational context of each book of the Bible. So, for example, when we're looking at the book of Leviticus, is this a book that's written to the church believers of today? Is it something that we need to be doing? May I suggest to you that the book of Leviticus is a handbook for priests of Israel. You say, well, I'm not a priest of Israel. No, I know, neither am I. So it's interesting to read, fascinating to read, but we realize its dispensational context. I'm not a Levitical priest. I've never been to the temple. There isn't a temple today. So I'm not able to perform any of the sacrifices today, nor would I be able to perform any of the sacrifices of today that are found in Leviticus. So we need to really look at each of the books of the Bible and find out what is the dispensational context for each book. Secondly, we need to ask ourselves, what are the unique features of each book? See, each book of the Bible is quite unique, quite different to everything else. What are the unique features of each book? And this is a fascinating study when you come to the Gospels. Now, the first three Gospels are called the Synoptic Gospels. And we might ask, well, what are the particular features of each Gospel? How do they relate to one another? And how do all three relate to the fourth Gospel? See the point? So the unique features of each book. And you might also then give not only a title for each book of the Bible, a title of your own making, but you might also think about how these books relate to one another, and you might give a title for groups of books of the Bible. Now, I know that this is all it seems like a massive task. It isn't a massive task, but it is the way in which we get an overall concept of what the Bible is teaching. So this is what I call natural study, and we're going to continue to talk about natural study on the next video. We're going to talk about what I call intensive Bible book study, or some people call it just Bible study. But there we are. I call it intensive Bible study because we really concentrate and we hone down into the passage, a passage, to find out what the book is all about. Well, God bless you. I look forward to speaking to you on the next video. Bye for now.